The crimson metronome was lifted above the gala table like a joke before it was treated like evidence, its lacquered body catching the chandelier light, and its 18K gold-tipped arm trembling in Julian Ravensworth's hand. Evelyn Valerius stood 12 feet away in a vivid red dress that made her look less like a wife and more like a verdict, while Julian's black suit absorbed the light beside Chloe St. Clair's white dress, the three of them forming a cruel portrait of replacement, erasure, and public theater. Then came the brutal truth. Before hundreds of adult shareholders, bankers, and board members, Julian called Evelyn's heirloom a superstitious relic from a woman who could no longer keep up with the AI era, pushed a resignation packet toward her, and demanded she accept responsibility for a financial discrepancy his own leadership had buried. Evelyn did not cry. She studied the angle of the metronome's arm, the distance between Julian's fingers and the gold tip, and the way Chloe watched the room instead of the numbers. Something inside her did not break loudly. It became precise. The 10th anniversary gala of Ravensworth Financial had been designed to crown Julian as the visionary of a billion-dollar trading empire, but he had turned it into a public execution of the only mind that had ever made that empire breathe. Every screen behind the ballroom stage carried the company's silver logo. Every table held crystal glasses and printed shareholder reports, and every important face in the room had been invited to witness Evelyn's removal as if humiliation were a corporate strategy. Julian placed the metronome down beside the resignation papers and leaned close enough for only the front row to hear his softer cruelty. "Sign it cleanly, Evelyn. Let the company move into the future." Chloe stepped forward on cue, white silk falling around her like borrowed innocence, and the master of ceremonies announced her as the new face of financial transparency. The applause arrived carefully, not warmly. Some shareholders clapped, because wealth teaches people to follow the strongest hand before they know whether it is clean. Evelyn looked at the packet. It accused her of oversight failures, undocumented calibration decisions, and emotional attachment to outdated analog systems. Julian had not merely stolen credit. He had written a story where her genius became instability and his dependence became leadership. She picked up the pen. Across the room, a senior board member lowered his eyes. A compliance officer stopped moving. Chloe's chin lifted half an inch, certain that silence meant defeat. Evelyn signed her name with mathematical steadiness, each letter placed as if it belonged in an equation rather than a surrender. Julian reached for the papers first, hungry for the symbol of victory, but Evelyn closed her hand over the metronome before he could touch it again. "This stays with me," she said. The sentence was quiet, but it cut through the polished room harder than any accusation. Julian gave a short, controlled breath through his nose and adjusted his cufflinks, choosing arrogance because fear would have cost too much in public. "Keep the antique," he said. "We have the code." That was the mistake. He believed the source code was the instrument. He had never understood that Evelyn's analog timing signature was the rhythm, the protected calibration language hidden inside years of acoustic mathematics, market timing, and the heirloom's old-world precision. She turned from the stage without asking permission, red dress moving through the black and white crowd like a line of fire through marble. Behind her, Julian accepted congratulations. Beside him, Chloe posed for cameras she had not earned. Evelyn crossed the ballroom doors with the metronome held against her ribs, and for the first time in 10 years, she did not feel like she was leaving a marriage. She felt like she was removing the heartbeat from a machine that had mistaken her silence for weakness. Evelyn did not walk fast after leaving the ballroom, because speed would have given Julian the satisfaction of imagining panic. She moved through the private corridor with the crimson analog metronome held against her side, passing gold-framed mirrors, closed service doors, and security staff trained not to stare at billionaires when their marriages collapsed in public. Behind her, the gala continued with expensive discipline, but the celebration already felt delayed, as if the room itself had lost timing. She stopped beneath a bronze wall sconce, opened her phone, and called the ballroom owner directly. Not the event coordinator, not a desperate assistant. The owner. Years earlier, before Julian had learned to call her antique, Evelyn had personally underwritten the ballroom's acoustic renovation, the same hidden timing panels that allowed financial presentations, investor feeds, and live market demonstrations to run without audio drift. The agreement had been written in her name, and that meant the venue's preservation obligations ran to Evelyn personally, not to Julian's public relations team. Her voice was calm when the owner answered. Preserve every camera feed from the main ballroom, the stage microphones, and the shareholder presentation system. There was a pause long enough to reveal surprise, not resistance. Evelyn looked down at the metronome's red lacquer and saw the thin gold arm resting exactly still. Mark the file as legal hold, she added. No edits. No substitutions. No private deletion requests from Ravensworth Financial. Inside the ballroom, Julian was still performing victory. He stood beside Chloe, black suit immaculate, one hand lightly resting near the resignation packet, as if paper could become proof of genius. Chloe lifted her chin for the cameras, white dress glowing under the stage lights, already practicing the posture of a woman who had mistaken proximity for authority. Shareholders smiled with guarded mouths. Bankers watched with professional uncertainty. Evelyn's red dress had disappeared from the room, but the space she left behind seemed larger than her presence had been allowed to be. At the corridor table, she opened a secure legal portal on her phone and uploaded the first notice. It was not emotional. It was not theatrical. It was a revocation of limited use permission for her protected analog timing signature, effective immediately upon public misrepresentation, forced reputational transfer, and unauthorized attribution of calibration architecture. She attached the IP certificate, the original acoustic calibration logs, and the contract clause Julian had forgotten because men like him often read signatures as ownership and footnotes as decoration. Then she sent a second notice to the senior compliance officer at Ravensworth Financial. Any continued use of her analog timing layer would require independent audit, corrected attribution, and written consent from Evelyn Valerius. Let him run what he thinks he owns, she said softly to the empty corridor. The first irregularity appeared less than 4 minutes later. On the gala's main screen, a live demonstration of Ravensworth's trading platform refreshed a fraction behind the market index beside it. It was only milliseconds. To ordinary eyes, nothing had happened. To Evelyn, it was a hairline crack in a marble floor. Julian noticed the hesitation but chose arrogance before analysis. He tapped the side of the podium and continued speaking about next-generation transparency. Chloe glanced toward the screen, then toward the audience, searching for a reaction she could control. There was none yet. That was the cruel beauty of precision. Collapse did not need drama at the beginning. It needed measurement. Evelyn walked toward the service elevator, red dress cutting through the quiet back hall, and when the doors opened, she did not look back. Her phone displayed confirmation from the ballroom owner, footage secured, audio preserved, presentation archive locked. A second message followed from legal records, revocation received. Evelyn placed the metronome inside her red leather case and touched the latch once. Above her, in the ballroom Julian believed he still commanded, the trading platform fell another millisecond behind. Evelyn reached the 42nd floor of a private accounting tower 6 miles from the ballroom just after the gala footage had been locked under legal hold. The room she entered was not glamorous, only clean, quiet, and deliberately cold at 66 degrees Fahrenheit, with glass walls facing the financial district and a conference table long enough to hold a decade of betrayal. She placed the crimson analog metronome at the center of the table, opened the red leather case, and for the first time that night, let herself look directly into the lacquered wood. Her reflection appeared in the curved crimson surface, fractured by the gold-tipped arm, and the truth arrived without mercy. She had spent 10 years keeping the heart of a heartless man alive. No more, she said. The words were not anger. They were math. Around her, encrypted drives, printed calibration logs, and archived board approvals formed a private courtroom of evidence Julian had never cared to read. He had seen code as conquest, signatures as possession, and Evelyn's restraint as something he could weaponize against her. But high-frequency trading was not theater. It was timing, permission, audit trails, latency tolerances, and microscopic trust measured in milliseconds. Evelyn opened the first binder and reviewed the original analog timing signature registration, where her intellectual property was not described as a decorative supplement, but as the protected calibration layer that aligned Ravensworth Financial's trading core with compliant execution windows. She pulled up years of acoustic modeling notes, each page connecting the metronome's analog variants to the system's timing corrections. Julian had built a mythology around artificial intelligence because investors loved the phrase. Evelyn had built the architecture beneath it because markets punished lies. She drafted a third notice, this one addressed to the company's outside auditors, stating that any post-revocation transaction using her analog layer required immediate review for unauthorized IP dependency. Then she prepared a memorandum for financial regulators, not accusing, not pleading, simply mapping the sequence. Public scapegoating, forced reputational transfer, unauthorized continued reliance, and timing drift after revocation. Every sentence was sharpened until emotion had no place to hide. Across town, Julian was probably still telling the room he had modernized beyond her. Evelyn knew better. The stolen code could open. It could execute. It could even impress men who confused movement with control. But without her protected calibration rhythm, the system could not stay aligned with the reference model under market pressure. She opened a sealed folder marked by date, not sentiment, and reviewed the discrepancy Julian had blamed on her. It had not begun in her equations. It had begun in executive overrides, rushed profit targets, and his need to prove that his instincts could outperform the woman he envied. Chloe's smear campaign had given those failures a face, but not a foundation. Evelyn printed the ballroom owner's confirmation, attached it to the legal packet, and placed it beside the metronome. The strategy became clean. First, preserve the public coercion. Second, freeze the IP trail. Third, force every transaction after revocation into audit exposure. Fourth, let Julian keep speaking until his own confidence became evidence. She changed out of the red dress into a tailored red suit hanging in the private office closet, not because she was hiding from the woman humiliated in the ballroom, but because she was becoming the version of herself Julian had feared most. When the metronome's arm began moving again under her hand, Evelyn watched it mark time with old-world discipline. She did not need to destroy his empire. She only needed to withdraw the rhythm that had made it look alive. Now, here is where most people misunderstand power. The dangerous thing about arrogant men is that they often mistake a woman's silence for surrender, never realizing she is simply recalibrating the end. Julian did not humiliate Evelyn because he was certain of his power. He humiliated her because somewhere beneath that tailored black suit, beneath the billionaire smile he practiced for cameras, he knew the board trusted her mind more than his performance. That is what jealousy does when it cannot compete with genius. It does not ask to learn. It tries to erase. Tell me, what kind of man mocks the very instrument that kept his empire alive? The kind who needs the world to believe that ownership is the same as mastery. But paper can transfer a title. It cannot transfer precision. A signature can remove a wife from a company letterhead. It cannot remove the rhythm she built into the walls. By 7:15 the next morning, Evelyn Valerius stood inside a vacant 9,000-square-foot floor in an old financial building 5 miles south of Ravensworth Financial, dressed in a tailored red suit that made the empty space feel less abandoned than chosen. The air was held at 67 degrees Fahrenheit. The windows faced a canyon of glass towers, and the floor still carried the faint smell of fresh paint and old money. She did not ask whether the place was worthy of her. She made the decision worthy by entering it. The leasing representative placed the temporary access card on the table, but Evelyn was already studying the walls, the ceiling height, the wiring panels, the acoustics, the flow of movement from the elevator bank to the inner rooms. A marriage had ended in a ballroom. An empire would begin in silence. She set the crimson analog metronome on the bare conference table and opened her laptop beside it. On the screen, the first folder was not labeled Revenge. It was labeled Institute Formation. She had chosen the name with surgical restraint, Valerius Institute, for mathematical timing. No borrowed surname. No decorative luxury crest. No artificial intelligence slogan printed large enough to hide a weak foundation. Just her name, her field, and the principal Julian had never respected. She called a corporate attorney by title only and authorized the filing. She called a systems architect and requested a secure research cloud with no dependency on Ravensworth infrastructure. She called a private auditor and offered access to 10 years of calibration records under non-disclosure. Each call was short. Each instruction landed clean. Build it without ghosts, she said. By noon, Workstations were ordered, secure servers were contracted, and the first draft of a client framework sat open on the table beside the metronome. Evelyn divided the whiteboard into 4 columns: timing architecture, compliance modeling, acoustic calibration, institutional trust. Those were not departments yet. They were weapons shaped like a future. She wrote the first research mandate herself: to make financial systems fast without making them blind, precise without making them lawless, intelligent without pretending machines had no human authors. The sentence looked calm. It carried teeth. Across town, Julian's public relations office was still circulating Chloe's statement about transparency, resilience, and modernization, but Evelyn did not read it twice. Chloe understood cameras. Evelyn understood systems. One could trend for a day. The other could decide whether a billion-dollar platform survived a market open. At 2:40 p.m., the private auditor sent the first confirmation. Ravensworth's trading delay had widened under stress testing, still measured in milliseconds, still publicly invisible, but already material to compliance review. Evelyn placed that report under the metronome's gold arm and looked at the empty floor around her. Desks would arrive. People would arrive. Power would arrive last, because real power did not need to enter loudly. It needed structure strong enough to stay after applause died. She picked up a marker and wrote one sentence across the glass wall facing the city: "The rhythm belongs to its maker." By the second week, the 9,000-square-foot floor had transformed from refuge into a disciplined command center. With matte black workstations lining the glass walls and the crimson analog metronome sealed at the center of the main research table like a quiet monarch refusing to explain itself. Evelyn moved through the space in a vivid red suit, reviewing installation diagrams, server permissions, compliance firewalls, and the first institutional proposals with the patience of someone who had stopped asking the world for permission to be brilliant. No borrowed infrastructure, she told the systems architect. No hidden dependency. No one owns what they cannot understand. The Valerius Institute for Mathematical Timing did not launch with a party. It launched with a secure memo sent to 6 major funds, 2 private banks, and a regulatory advisory group that had already begun questioning Ravensworth Financial's drifting execution windows. Evelyn did not accuse Julian by name in the memo. She did something more damaging. She educated the market. She explained that in high-frequency trading, a delay smaller than a blink could still alter compliance exposure, client execution, audit integrity, and institutional trust. She attached clean diagrams, timing tolerances, and a model showing how analog calibration could reduce drift under stress conditions without hiding human accountability behind artificial intelligence language. The memo was elegant. It was also a blade. By Friday morning, requests began arriving through encrypted channels. A private bank wanted a consultation. A hedge fund wanted a timing audit. A pension advisory board wanted to know whether Ravensworth Financial's platform had ever depended on Evelyn's protected calibration layer. Evelyn read each request once, prioritized them by legal exposure, and assigned them to folders with exact naming discipline. She was not chasing clients. She was letting frightened institutions find the only adult in the room. Across town, Julian had ordered his internal engineering team to reproduce what he called the rhythm problem. He stood in a black suit at the head of a glass conference table, jaw tight, voice lower than usual, while charts showed tiny delays spreading under market load simulations. To him, milliseconds had once been investor language. Now they looked like cracks in a vault. "Fix the variance," he said. No one answered quickly. That silence cost him more than any insult Evelyn could have delivered. Chloe tried to cover the hesitation with polish. She released a statement describing Evelyn as a former executive resisting innovation, then arranged a televised appearance in a white dress under soft studio lights, with phrases about transparency and emotional overreaction prepared by the PR department. But investigative journalists had already received hints from the locked ballroom archive, the preserved stage audio, and the timeline between Evelyn's public removal and the system drift. Chloe could sell certainty to cameras. She could not explain calibration dependency, audit rights, or why the company's new face of transparency had stood beside a forced resignation packet while the true architect walked away with the only instrument that mattered. At the Institute, Evelyn's first formal client arrived without photographers. The delegation stepped from the elevator carrying quiet urgency and legal folders. They were not there for revenge. They were there because markets reward confidence until confidence becomes risk. Evelyn led them into the main room, placed one hand lightly on the clear case holding the metronome, and presented the Institute's founding framework. Speed must serve accountability. Technology must identify its human author, and no financial system should be allowed to hide fragility behind glamour. By the end of the meeting, the client signed a preliminary engagement worth more than any salary Julian had once used to make Evelyn feel replaceable. She did not celebrate. She filed the agreement, updated the compliance calendar, and wrote the Institute's first hiring note. Seek mathematicians who respect silence, engineers who document everything, and analysts who understand that precision is a moral position. Outside the glass walls, Manhattan carried on with its usual hunger. Inside, Evelyn's empire began without applause, without a husband's surname, and without a single lie holding it upright. By the end of the first quarter, the Valerius Institute for Mathematical Timing had become the place powerful institutions mentioned quietly before admitting fear publicly. Evelyn did not chase headlines, yet her name moved through board packets, risk memorandums, and closed-door conversations while analysts, mathematicians, engineers, and compliance specialists worked around the clear case holding the crimson analog metronome. Evelyn stood before them in a structured red dress beneath a tailored red blazer, her posture calm, her eyes sharper than any market chart behind her. Speed without accountability is not innovation, she told the room. It is exposure. That sentence became the Institute's standard. Financial firms began submitting their systems to Evelyn's timing audits before regulators could demand them. Private banks wanted certification. Pension funds wanted assurance. Even competitors that had once praised Julian's artificial intelligence platform began asking whether their own trading architecture had hidden timing dependencies they had never bothered to understand. Evelyn answered with documents, not theatrics. She built a framework that graded latency, integrity, human authorship, audit recoverability, and legal permission as seriously as raw performance. It was elegant enough for executives and ruthless enough for regulators. At a closed-door financial summit in Chicago, more than 700 miles from the ballroom where Julian had mocked her heirloom, Evelyn took the stage before a room of adult institutional leaders who did not clap too early because they were afraid of looking uninformed. Behind her, a screen displayed a simple line. 1 millisecond can separate confidence from catastrophe. She placed the metronome beside the podium, not as decoration, but as the original reference symbol behind her protected calibration model. The future is not less human because it is faster, she said. The future is more dangerous when powerful people refuse to name the human mind behind the machine. Across the room, executives who had once treated Julian as a financial oracle took notes like students. That was the true reversal. Evelyn had not begged for the market's attention. The market had run out of safer people to trust. Meanwhile, at Ravensworth Financial, Julian's black suit remained perfect, but perfection had started to look like armor instead of confidence. His board meetings became shorter and colder. Reports arrived with more red markers than green projections. Internal engineers could imitate parts of Evelyn's code, but every replacement model widened under pressure, drifting by tiny measures that looked harmless until a compliance officer translated them into liability. Julian began speaking less during technical briefings, not because he understood more, but because every question exposed how much he had never known. I need solutions, not vocabulary, he told the team. No one mistook that for leadership. Chloe tried to revive the company's image with a second transparency campaign, appearing in a white dress before cameras and repeating language about resilience, modernization, and trust. But investigative journalists had already connected her public statements to the night Evelyn was blamed in the ballroom, making Chloe look less like a leader and more like a decorative shield for numbers she could not explain. When asked whether Ravensworth Financial had legal permission to use the analog timing signature after Evelyn's revocation, she paused too long. That pause traveled faster than her campaign. Evelyn watched none of it during working hours. She was preparing the Institute's first public standard, a document that would allow any firm in America to test whether its trading system depended on undocumented timing architecture. The standard did not mention Julian. It did not need to. Once released, it gave the market a language to describe exactly what he had stolen. exactly what he had misunderstood, and exactly why Evelyn's silence had never been weakness. On the morning the Standard went live, 3 major institutions suspended pending contracts with Ravensworth Financial and requested independent review through the Valerius Institute. Evelyn stood at the glass wall of her office, 38 floors above the street, watching Manhattan move below her in disciplined lines of cars, money, and ambition. Behind her, the metronome rested under light, its crimson body steady inside the case. She had not taken Julian's crown. She had made the room understand it had always been made of borrowed rhythm. The collapse of Ravensworth Financial did not arrive as a single catastrophe. It arrived through professional withdrawals so clean that Julian could not accuse anyone of betrayal without exposing his own dependence. A delayed credit renewal, 2 suspended execution mandates, and a platform forced to verify lawful calibration permission. By Monday morning, a pension advisory board had moved its risk review to the Valerius Institute, and by Tuesday afternoon, the boardroom on the top floor of Ravensworth Financial felt colder than the 65 degrees Fahrenheit printed on the wall display. Julian sat at the head of the table in a black suit that no longer made him look powerful. It made him look sealed inside himself. Reports lay in front of him with language he hated: unauthorized dependency, unexplained latency drift, reputational exposure, audit inconsistency, leadership misrepresentation. His hand rested near the first page, 2 fingers unsteady against the paper edge. "Where is the replacement model?" he asked. His voice came out thinner than the room expected. The senior engineering lead explained that every attempted reconstruction performed well in controlled demonstrations but drifted under volatile market load, widening by milliseconds when order volume spiked. Julian stared at him as if intimidation could correct mathematics. It could not. For 10 years, people had nodded when Julian spoke because the money behind him moved with unnatural precision. Now the money hesitated, and the nodding stopped. A board member who had once toasted his genius asked whether Evelyn had ever been properly credited as the originator of the timing architecture. Another asked why Chloe's transparency campaign had launched the same night Evelyn was pressured to resign. A third asked why the company had continued using systems tied to a revoked IP layer after notice was received. Julian opened his mouth, paused, and reached for water without drinking it. The pause did more damage than a confession. Downstairs, employees stopped repeating the company's approved talking points. Traders watched dashboards with their shoulders tight. Analysts saved private copies of risk notices. Assistants forwarded meeting requests to legal before answering. The loyalty Julian had purchased with salaries and prestige began to behave like any market under pressure. It searched for safer ground. Chloe tried to reclaim the narrative from a media studio 20 blocks away, wearing a white dress beneath bright lights, her voice polished into calm certainty. She spoke about modernization, female leadership, and the importance of moving beyond outdated systems. But the lead journalist did not ask about image. The question was technical. Had she known that Evelyn's analog timing signature had been revoked before Ravensworth Financial continued market operations? Chloe's face remained composed, but her answer moved in circles. Then came the second question. Had the resignation packet been prepared before the financial discrepancy was independently reviewed? Her fingers tightened around the chair arm. The third question was simpler. What exactly did she understand about acoustic calibration and high-frequency trading? By the time the segment ended, Chloe had not been ruined by romance, jealousy, or rumor. She had been exposed by vocabulary she could not survive. The clip traveled through financial circles faster than her PR team could contain it. At Ravensworth Financial, Julian watched it alone in his office, the city burning gold outside the windows while his reflection floated over the screen like a man trapped behind glass. The phone on his desk kept lighting with messages from bankers, counsel, board members, and clients asking for corrected disclosures. None of them asked how he felt. Power did not care about his humiliation once it became expensive. He turned away from the screen and looked at the framed magazine cover on the wall, the one that had called him the architect of machine speed finance. For the first time, the word architect looked like evidence against him. Across Manhattan, Evelyn did not interrupt her institute's afternoon audit review. She did not send a statement. She did not celebrate the collapse. She stood before her team in red, reviewing a client's latency map, while the crimson analog metronome rested in its clear case behind her. Julian's empire was not exploding. It was losing rhythm in public, 1 millisecond, one client, one abandoned lie at a time. The final confrontation took place in a private financial arbitration room 41 floors above Midtown, where measured lighting and soft carpet made the silence feel formal. Evelyn arrived alone in red, carrying a narrow glass case that held the crimson analog metronome under archival light. Julian sat across the long table in a black suit, his posture controlled but no longer imperial, while Chloe sat 3 seats behind him in a white dress that looked more expensive than convincing. No cameras were allowed inside. That made the room worse for Julian. Without an audience, performance had nowhere to hide. The arbitration panel reviewed the evidence in silence. The preserved ballroom footage, the stage audio, the resignation packet, the revocation notice, the delayed trading records, the audit trail showing continued dependency after Evelyn withdrew permission. Julian's legal team had prepared arguments about corporate continuity, emergency reliance, and shareholder protection, but every argument leaned on the same forbidden assumption. Evelyn's work could be used because his company needed it. Need was not ownership. Panic was not permission. Evelyn placed the metronome in the center of the table, 6 inches from the packet Julian had once treated as her erasure. "This is not sentimental property," she said. "It is protected calibration architecture." Julian's jaw tightened. He looked at the metronome, then at the panel, then finally at Evelyn, as if seeing her clearly had become the most expensive thing he had avoided for 10 years. His voice stayed low. "We can settle this privately." Evelyn did not move. The room understood the sentence before he finished it. Private meant silence. Private meant money replacing truth. Private meant he wanted the rhythm back without admitting who made the music. He offered a public advisory title, retroactive compensation, restored equity, and a statement describing her departure as a mutual misunderstanding. Chloe shifted behind him, her hands folding over one another, because the word mutual had become dangerous after the footage. Evelyn opened her leather folder and slid 1 page forward. It listed her conditions with surgical clarity: corrected authorship records, public compliance disclosure, termination of the smear campaign, independent audit of all post-revocation trades, and a written admission that Ravensworth Financial's timing layer originated with Evelyn Valerius. Julian read the page once. His fingers pressed against the paper, then stilled. "You know what that does to me," he said. Evelyn looked at him without softness, but also without cruelty. That made it harder. Cruelty would have given him something to fight. Precision gave him only truth. "You didn't hate my metronome, Julian," she said. "You hated that the room trusted its rhythm more than your voice." The words landed cleanly. The panel did not react, but Julian did. Not dramatically, not with tears. His throat worked once, his gaze dropped to the metronome's gold-tipped arm, and the arrogance in his posture lost its structure. Chloe looked toward the door, then toward the lead attorney, searching for a version of the story where she had not helped build the lie. None appeared. Evelyn continued, her voice level. "You called it antique because you needed the future to belong to you. But the future you sold was calibrated by the woman you tried to erase." Julian leaned back, the leather chair moving slightly under the shift of his weight. For the first time, he did not answer immediately. Silence had belonged to Evelyn once because he forced it on her. Now it belonged to him because the facts had taken language away. The panel requested confirmation of whether Evelyn would temporarily relicense the analog timing signature to protect existing clients during orderly transition. She agreed to a limited, supervised, 90-day emergency license under the Institute's control, with no brand use, no executive claim, and no removal of her authorship. Julian stared at the page as if the terms were not a settlement but a mirror. He could save pieces of the company only by admitting he had never been the engine. Evelyn closed the glass case and stood. Her red coat caught the pale room light like a flag that did not need wind. "My work may stabilize your exit," she said. "It will never again decorate your lie." Then she walked out, leaving Julian in the quiet room with the one thing he had feared more than failure, a record that named the true source of his power. And here is the truth this story leaves behind. True power is not being the loudest in the room. It is being the one who decides when the music of an empire must finally stop. Betrayal has a cost that money rarely calculates correctly. A man like Julian thinks the price is a settlement, a reputation problem, a few uncomfortable headlines, maybe a lost contract or two. But the real cost is deeper. When you betray the person who protected your weakness, you do not simply lose affection. You lose the invisible architecture that made you look stronger than you were. Tell me, what is more dangerous to an arrogant man than a woman who stops explaining herself? Evelyn did not win because she shouted louder. She won because she understood that dignity is not noise. Dignity is discipline under pressure, evidence kept clean, timing held steady, and the courage to walk away before bitterness becomes your home. 1 year later, the Valerius Institute for Mathematical Timing occupied 3 full floors above Manhattan, and the old financial building that once looked temporary now felt like a landmark built from restraint. The main research hall was bright, precise, and alive with adult mathematicians, engineers, auditors, and institutional fellows moving between glass rooms named after principals instead of donors. Integrity, latency, authorship, trust. Evelyn walked through the center aisle in a vivid red suit, not as a symbol designed for cameras, but as a woman who had learned to dress like the truth she refused to soften. She paused beside a glass display case near the Institute's entrance, where the crimson analog metronome rested under museum lighting with a small engraved plaque beneath it. The plaque did not mention Julian. It did not need to. It simply read, "Original analog timing instrument used in the development of ethical market calibration architecture." Students from a graduate fellowship program stood nearby, reading it with the quiet seriousness people reserve for objects that survived being underestimated. Evelyn watched them for a moment and felt no need to correct the past out loud. Her freedom no longer depended on being believed by the room that had humiliated her. She had built new rooms. At 10 a.m., she addressed a gathering of institutional leaders in the Institute's lecture theater, where every seat was filled and every screen carried her framework for human-authored financial systems. No chandelier hung above her. No husband stood beside her. No woman in white waited to inherit what she could not understand. Evelyn placed one hand on the podium and looked across the room with calm authority. "Precision is not cold," she said. "It is how we protect people from the arrogance of unchecked power." The sentence traveled through the theater with weight, not volume. Afterward, she returned to her private office, where sunlight cut clean lines. Across the floor, and the city moved far below in disciplined waves of traffic, ambition, and distance. On her desk lay new institute agreements, research grants, and a sealed invitation to advise on national timing standards. She signed only the ones aligned with her principles. That was freedom too. Not saying yes because the world finally wanted her. Saying yes only where her name, her work, and her conscience could stand together. In the hallway, the metronome remained still inside its case, no longer hidden in a ballroom, no longer mocked as antique, no longer forced to keep rhythm for a heartless empire. It had become what Evelyn had become, preserved, visible, untouchable, and entirely her own. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.